Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CFO Connect session on unleashing the power of AI, finance automation for CFOs. I'm Joyce Mackenzie. I'll be your moderator for the session. And before we get started, I'm going to do a quick intro on CFO Connect. CFO Connect is a global community of more than 12,000 finance leaders, powered by Spendesk, which the three of us have been a happy and active member of. So very fortunate to be part of this session today. Before we get started in introducing our speakers on the panel, I wanted to just kick off with some high-level context, right? With the advancements in Gen AI and LLMs, a lot of money and talent has been pouring into this space in the past years plus. And especially with COVID and geopolitics, we're definitely experiencing a unprecedented systemic shift across many industries. It's been a hot topic for some time, but there's also a ton of noise in terms of where value is actually being created inside these businesses. So what we would like to touch upon today is AI in finance in particular. Is it hype or is it real value? I think the verdict is out and only time will tell. But what we hope to share is some unique perspective to bring clarity and insights into what's to come. Just as a reminder, the session is very much for you, the audience. So feel free throughout this session to drop in your questions and thoughts as we go into the chat on the right-hand side. And as well, the session is being recorded and the recording will be shared afterwards as well as made available on YouTube channel. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce Paul Jun, GP at Death Capital, and Sarah Fu, Angel Investor and Startup Advisor. Welcome.
Thank you, Joyce.
So maybe I'll just hand it off over to you, first of all, a little bit to give you, for the audience to give a quick background on yourselves. You've both been operators and investors. Curious to get your take on what you've seen historically with the development of data, ML, and also AI, and what you're thinking about all the kind of noise and content that's out there today on this particular topic.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm happy to get started. So basically, as you mentioned, I have been an operator. So for folks who didn't know my background. So basically, I was at Stripe for 4 years as a CFO of Stripe Connect, Stripe's like flagship product. And then I have also been an investor before in public market. And these days really focus on like early stage like startups, especially these days there are like a lot of Gen AI startups. So I would say basically when I was in the operating shoes at Stripe, we already see a lot of like ML technology, right? So a prime example is basically forecasting. We all want to make our forecasting as accurate as possible. And Stripe is a very data-driven company. We have a very strong product and engineering culture and very strong data science team. So essentially we were really able to like leverage a lot of the best in class like ML, different type of like models to really make like the forecasting as accurate as possible from different perspectives so that we could really get into the nuance of the data to understand what is driving the trends, whether that's specific like customer segment, like specific region, specific type of customer. So that was like really helpful for us to provide like the next level of insights to like the CEOs, the business partners. What I would say today is the LLM trend, I would say it's like very, very different. So historically, like all the benefits you get from like ML still applies, but where I'm seeing a lot of like application of like LLM today is just to like rethink a lot of like the traditional workflow, especially before like in finance job, like we all do those things that are like very repetitive, right? Like creating the same slide deck, like do a weekly, like bi-weekly, like monthly refresh, or like building the model and spending so much time on those like repetitive things. So I think like now with LLM, there's just like a lot of like opportunity to do those repetitive things like a lot better. And I know we're probably going to get into like real use cases later. So I would just say like right now it's just like you should think about like LLM as a different form of like technology. Like there are things that were not even possible before, right? Like before it's like I can use like the old ML to make the model more accurate. But now it's like, okay, you can use like ChatGPT. ChatGPT can even like write code for me, right? So like now in some way, like I'm not only just like a CFO, I could even be like the data scientist or like the engineer in some extent to make the job of like CFO a lot more powerful. So I'll just like pause here, and I know we're going into a lot more details later.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And Paul, what are your high-level thoughts on everything that's going on?
I see it impacting like two areas the most currently. One is kind of FP&A and forecasting, and Sarah touched on that a little bit. I think it is improving forecast models to some extent by being able to ingest additional data or being able to more efficiently write some of the like code for writing those models. Two would be like accounting. I've seen it help with categorization, processing, better rules engines. So I've seen both kind of like the accounting and the FP&A side impacted by the latest AI developments.
Okay, excellent. And maybe I'll actually just ask the audience a little bit today. I know we're expecting something like a few hundred attendees, mostly from the finance community all over Europe, US, and globally. I'll just throw up a poll question for the audience. How often are you looking at data outside of spreadsheets, be that Excel or Google spreadsheet? Is it daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly? You can just hit on your chat on the right-hand side, vote now. Then we'll be able to see what the audience says. Okay, I see the votes are starting to come in. So most people are using 62%, 2/3 of our audience today are using and looking at data outside of spreadsheets already. That's really powerful. Okay, one second question as a follow-up to that. How often are you using AI in some format or another for your work today? Is it daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly? Super interesting. Seems like we have a pretty close tie between daily and weekly within the audience. Excellent. Okay, maybe throw the question back to you, Sarah and Paul. Like, how are you guys using and leveraging both data and LLMs within your day-to-day work today? Paul? Or Sarah? Go for it.
I can go first. Yeah. So these days I'm mostly focused on the investing side. So the use case for finance user is very different. But there are like a lot of use cases specifically within like the CFO finance org. And then I'll talk about different examples. So one example recently is like, okay, like I do a lot of data analysis now also in my investor days. And before basically you will like put all the data in Excel, you will like try to create like a chart, and then it takes like a lot of time to just like do like the correct formatting, like adding tags, a lot of those things. And then essentially like now what I did is I basically just give the instruction like to ChatGPT, and then I'm literally like, okay, creating like this type of chart, this format, and essentially like ChatGPT gave me like a Python code, and then I just like run the Python code. So basically the benefit is like before like adding a chart may take like 2 hours. Like now I have it like in 2 minutes, and it's just like so much easier to like update. So I think it's kind of like a rethink of like how we do work, right? Before it's like as finance person, we're like so used to just put all the data in Excel, manually creating either in like Excel or Google side. And now it's just like for those of you who like haven't used like the code side of like AI, like it just like I really encourage you to like try to like maybe like have like ChatGPT to generate like the Python code for you, and you run the Python code, and it's just like day and night like a big shift. So that is like one very particular example.
Awesome. Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I think the large language models are really good at reading and writing use cases. And so an example of that is, for example, if you feed it kind of like the ASC 606 handbook that your auditor might use and a revenue contract, it can kind of go through it and see if the way you've written your ASC 606 memo is consistent with the handbook and consistent with your model customer contract, and could kind of give you feedback on it. And so it's actually a good kind of almost like an internal audit function to do like a second check through some of the accounting procedures and memorandums that you may have. Another example on more the forecasting side is like you could have it help you write the SQL or the Looker ML to retrieve data that you may be using for revenue forecasts or for some other type of data-driven forecast that you would normally be writing by hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you, it's a combination of really looking at, well, first collecting and then interpreting that unstructured data and putting it into a more structured format to do the analysis, and then leveraging existing structured data today to produce, a chart or a graph or something that's that otherwise would have taken a lot of time and effort. How does that impact? I mean, now you are both operators, now you're on the investing side. How does that impact how you think about where new technology is going to be born in the next decade, whether it be for the finance use cases or broader business use cases? Sarah?
Yeah. So my thinking is we're going to see like a huge wave of like basically like LLM powered like finance application in the next like 3 to 5 years. And then because like this technology is like so transformative, like even back at Stripe, we were like really good with like AI ML, but like now if I look at like LLM, just like the type of like transformation from LLM in specific use case is just like pretty like mind blowing. Obviously, there's still like a lot of hype. But I think like within like the hype and noise, you can start to see like some real use cases. So my thinking is we are going to see like just a lot more like real like finance like applications built on top of like LLM over like the next few years. And the end outcome is really going to like help like us like as CFOs or like VP finance to be like a lot more strategic. And also like we can also run the organization like a lot more efficient, right? Like as I mentioned before, like sort of a lot of the things before like accounting team close the book, right? Like Stripe has like literally like trillions of like payment transactions. So you can imagine just like aggregating all those like data takes so long to like close the book, doing like all the reconciliation. And now like basically with like AI, like a lot of things could be done like so much easier. So we're just going to see like way more like efficiency and basically like enabled from like new type of like basically AI powered finance application. And really it's going to like help like CFOs to be like a lot more strategic. So I would think like maybe in my like old job, like I would like to think I spent all the time doing like the strategic CFO type of work, but maybe like I actually like ended up spending 80% of the time on like the mundane, like low value add. And like finally I get the 20% of the time on the insights and then bring to like the CEO. They are like very excited. I think like in a few years, hopefully we can see like only 20% of the time doing like the mundane task and really like free up like the creativity, the mind space for like CFO and finance leader. You can actually use the 80% of the time to do a real strategic value add for the organization, which is what our business partners always ask for more.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, what are you seeing? I mean, having come out of pilot recently, which is an AI accounting solution, what are you seeing in terms of where the next wave of technology is to power both the finance sector and other industries as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a lot of stuff that's, I think, coming on tap. I think audit firms are very actively looking at how they could more automate the audit process, which today is still very like people driven, and they have large offshore teams that are kind of working with your auditors onshore to get through a lot of data sampling, etc. So I think over time you'll see more automation in that space and more software driven solutions from like the big four. I think like you'll also probably see on the company side a lot more automation over time. And I think that'll come in both like workflow, everything from close management to APAR, and also on kind of like the more strategic end to everything from board decks, analysis, modeling, I think will also become more streamlined over time, and I think that'll help just drive overall efficiency.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I think you both touched upon specifically different elements of, what a finance operations functions does within a company. So maybe we can dive one level deeper and just talk through where are you seeing the most opportunity, most startups being born in this space? Maybe starting with kind of the compliance and transactional piece. Like you mentioned APAR, ledger processing. What are some other use cases that you're seeing, Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say like we're still like really early stage on like real like AI startup building for the finance team. So if you think about just like the technology adoption, basically it was like only like last year that we saw like, oh, like now the model is like mature enough. Now there are different types of model. So I think like usually what you see with technology wave is like first like the model, the infrastructure needs to be like good enough, and then you can build application on top. So I would just like take a step back and say like we are still like really early in like the application wave. So that is sort of like good news and bad news. So the bad news is like there are like less like off the shelf like tools you could take today. But the good news is like if you are one of like the early movers, I know like a lot of the audience here is like we are like finance leader at tech company, right? So fundamentally, like if you are like excited to like try out some of those like new AI tools, it could really just give you like a step function change in terms of like productivity. So in terms of like specific like use cases I'm already seeing. So one example I would say is sort of like if you think about like the strengths of LLM is really on the unstructured data, right? So before it's like, okay, we do so much work in Excel and that's like all structure, but like there are so much data outside of Excel as we just saw in the poll. And one specific example, like I remember like from my Stripe days, like very vividly, it's just like there are like so many contracts, right? And like there are like legal document, like customer contracts, and then it affects finance because there are like all different terms, right? I was like, sales team, why do you negotiate like a million different terms? And then it makes like forecasting so difficult. And like each contract is like 20, 40 pages with addendum. And this is just like customer contract, right? And then on the other hand, you have like vendor contract, and that's like another huge pool. You have like partnership contract. And before it's just like so manual, like for like a human being to like open up like 50 PDF document, each with like 50 pages, trying to do like control F. And now basically what I'm seeing is like they're like, for example, like company, AI company, essentially their superpower is like they take those contracts and then they just like synthesize the information for you. So it's sort of like contract management, but on a high level, it also applies to like the finance use case. It's like, for example, for sales contract, to do my forecasting or like to help the sales team, I care about all those like key terms. Then essentially like the AI tool can just like extract like all the terms for you from like hundreds of like contracts all at once, and then it's still linked to all the source. So we all care about like accuracy as finance user. So you're like, okay, this is like customer C, they have like all this term, it doesn't look right, and then it gives you the ability to directly go back to the source so you could check it. But overall, it just like step function change than like going through like hundreds PDF individually.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing a lot of is, activities that a deal desk or maybe revenue or business operations leader would have historically done in the past in terms of, doing it manually, going through it. But now a lot of it, to your point, is like taking that unstructured data and really structuring and synthesizing what are the key takeaways from that.
Exactly.
Paul, are you seeing other use cases, within forecasting, planning, and analysis? So not just from the kind of, accounting and structured data piece, but actually on unstructured or contextual information.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of startups popping up in this space to help kind of drive forecasting, maybe connect up some data sources and it'll output some forecasts. I would say it's still like fairly early, depending on what space you're in on that side. But I think folks using it as a way to drive better efficiency. I think there was like an audience question on like, what do you use like the SQL queries for? Like, what would you do with the code after? Generally, if you're driving forecasting for, let's say, like you're trying to understand how a new product launch is going to impact your forecast and you have some early A/B test results, if you could pull the results and then you could extrapolate that across kind of going to general release, that would be an example of like a product level, fairly nuanced data query that you could use to help drive your revenue forecast. So depending on your company and the complexity you may have in your product, like revenue streams, I think some of the more in-depth queries can be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about these LLMs hallucinating, right? And how much of that is based on the quality of the data that gets ingested, as well as the prompts of training these LLM models. What are your thoughts on one of the biggest bottlenecks and problems for businesses generally at any stage, which is like data and data hygiene and the processes around that? How does advancements in ML and AI help maybe shortcut some of those headaches?
I think in some cases it helps. In other cases, I think that like an ounce of prevention is worth the pound of cure. And I think having like good data nomenclature, having a clean data pipeline, and like having the right unique IDs, etc., are things you should probably implement versus like try to have like AI or someone manually fixing the back end. And so I think like setting up your data structures in the right way from day one is immensely helpful in preventing the problem, kind of like technical debt from creeping up in the first place. Once you do have some technical debt on the data pipeline, I think it does help with the data cleaning process, which obviously is fairly costly depending on the level of volume of data you have.
Sarah, any additional thoughts there?
I think definitely like the data need to be clean in the first place, as Paul mentioned. I think like we all worry about like hallucination. So there are probably like two things I would add. One is basically if you were to use like external AI tools, definitely it's like very important. You want like the tools to show you like the sources, right? So that's like one thing. It sounds like so basic, but like when I evaluate a bunch of startups, it's just like crazy. Like there are like startup like selling into like investment banks or like consulting firm, and you don't even show sources. I'm like, how are we even going to like use this? So this is like some consideration. Another one is like if you are just trying to like experiment different like AI use cases like internally, I think you want to like find the use case where the cost of a hallucination is a little bit lower. And then there are different type of work, right? So if you are like, oh, generate a board deck, then obviously you don't want any mistakes. So the stake is like super low, super high. But there are like situations where like the stake could be lower. So for example, like when I was at Stripe, we do like all these different like strategy projects. It's like, okay, what's like the next product like Stripe should build? And then we sort of do our own like internal consulting type of projects. And then essentially in those cases, it's like, okay, you get like so many like different industry reports, competitive reports, like some internal documents, and you just try to like synthesize, like digest those information. So I think in this case, like the cost of like hallucination is like very low, since essentially you are just like trying to like gather some like basic information. So I think like basically when you do like just like AI use case like internally, I think it's helpful to like understand like, oh, what are like the more like high stake, like I really want like high accuracy, versus like some use case is more just like, okay, it's just like a introductory prep step anyway. So it's like okay to have like a little bit of hallucination.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just to continue on this thread, we have a question from the audience. Sharnay Powell, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. How do you balance the risk between using OpenAI to further the finance function and data protection?
So so I don't work for like OpenAI. I just use it for my personal purpose. So essentially, like my understanding is that if you use like OpenAI as like an enterprise, then your data are protected in that way. So it's sort of like what you get from like the OpenAI like enterprise solution. But obviously, I'm not affiliated with OpenAI anyways. It's just so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to kind of pull on this thread a little bit, there's a lot of discussion around ethics, regulation, data privacy in particular. How do you think about all those elements from as a CFO or as a finance leader when you're embedding both external business use cases and internal applications of AI. Paul, maybe I'll pass that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna take a second to go back to the hallucination question. The models are pretty good if you provide the full data set and ask it for something like a summary of the data set. I think generally where you run into problems is if you ask a question that is not in the data set, then like it will create an answer, but because the answer is not in the data set, the answer will be just wrong. And therefore that's a bad thing to happen. So I think you want to like think about like, does a data set you're providing, or if you're using the broader data set, the data set it has like for definitively have the answer to what you're looking for. And then if yes, like how can you build in the right checks and balances to make sure you're getting the correct answer? And so there's some like validation that you want to put in there. And then I think like, yeah, on internal use cases, I don't think about it too differently. I mean, I think like, again, like if you're like doing general knowledge queries on like large language models, like, yeah, you're going to get like a pretty high variance in responses to that. But generally folks are not like using that sort of stuff in production. It's much a more narrow use case, and therefore you have higher confidence that like, yeah, I mean, I think there's like certain things that you want to do with the prompt, like you probably want some constraint options. You want to make sure the constraint options make sense and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think the folks that are spending a lot of time on this have some good best practices here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a little bit now about practical business use cases and applications. Also touched upon a little bit on the risk and compliance piece. Maybe we could discuss a little bit about skills, right? So at the end of the day, people are still the biggest asset within a company. How does the evolution of some of the technology that you're seeing and the business use cases today impact the different roles and skills within a finance function, right? If we break it down into accounting and controls, risk compliance management, FP&A, RevOps, and business operations, and then the more strategic piece when it comes to organic growth, inorganic growth, go to market, funding, exits, etc. How do all the different technologies that you're seeing play out today impact the different skills and requirements for a professional within the finance industry?
Yeah, so I would say like basically what we're going to see is just like a lot of those roles shift to become like more strategic or like more like value add. I think like before you would typically see like, okay, like accounting, we hire like a lot of people, right? So it's like even for Stripe, like the first few like finance like hires are like all accounting because there are like so many transactions, closing the books like takes such a long time. So there was just like so much like heavy lift on the accounting side for like a lot of like basically data analysis type of stuff. And then, but what the business like really needs like is actually like more strategic stuff. Like I had this one-on-one conversation with like the previous Stripe CFO Divya, and she's like, okay, like what the entire finance org need is just more strategy. Well, like Patrick and John call us a need. It's just like we want more strategy from like the finance org. But the challenge is just like as finance team, like we used to like spend so much time like on like the number crunching, that more mundane part of like task. So I think what we're going to see the evolution is like a lot of like the more data type of work, like in some of like the basic like accountant function, some of like the revenue ops, like some of those like function, I think is going to become like smaller, or the job is going to become like more fun. And then it really like free up people, like even in like FP&A is going to be less about like building and updating the model. It's more about like sharing the insights from the model. So it's going to like shift towards like more from like before, like just data analysis, manipulation, into like sharing like the real business insights on like just how we could like potentially like 10x the enterprise value of our company. So that's like a thing that I think is exciting. But obviously it's going to like take some time. As I mentioned, we are still like really, really early stage on this journey. So I would say that's probably what we're going to see the evolution for like the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on this, Paul? So obviously you've been part of 2 scale-ups in the finance function. how have you seen the shift in technology impact how you think about resourcing and staffing overall within finance, but also G&A overall within a business?
I think it makes it an even more of a shift towards, I think what I've seen for a while is that there's been a shift towards having more technical folks in the finance world, like folks with comp sci degrees, because it's helpful to be able to like do something once in Excel, for example, or in a spreadsheet, but you don't want to do that day in and day out. And like, sure, you could probably create a macro, but it's a little clunky, and so you'd rather just do that in Python. And so I've seen that like there for a lot of the tasks that are being done by the finance org that are being done at high volume on a repeated basis, that more and more often people are doing that in code now versus clicking around in a spreadsheet. And I think with the LLMs making that process more efficient for people to spin up code pretty quickly, I suspect that trend will probably accelerate.
Okay. So I guess what I'm hearing from both of you, if it's fair to summarize, is less accounting and controllers going forward in the accounting function, perhaps, or them being reskilled to focus on more high valued strategic tasks, and more people coming from a science, technology, engineering, maths background who can also understand, the finance function and take on some of those skills. Is that like sort of a fair summary of what you guys are seeing?
I haven't seen headcount shift quite yet. I've seen the skill set of what the folks in the departments do shift. And so, yeah, that's generally what I've seen, because especially at these companies that are in hyper growth, like you will probably have like a pretty high volume of things to do between being a private company and being a public company. And so it's not that people are hiring less at those stages. It's generally more that, yeah, the sort of things that you look for in Canada has shifted a bit.
Okay, excellent. What are your views like now, thinking 5 years out? I mean, no one has a crystal ball, of course, but what are going to be the biggest fundamental shifts, to your point earlier, Sarah, on 10x enterprise value? What can the finance function and the business overall do to really leverage LLMs and AI to really deliver on that result?
Yeah. So obviously there's like no crystal ball, right? Like otherwise, like every company would 10x. Then it's like inflation. There's like no value. So I would just say like given like now the application is still like really early stage. So I would basically recommend you to like look through like the workflow of like the job today, right? So if you look at your finance org today, let's just pick a few core pillar like accounting, right? Like where is accounting spend most of the time, and which part of the job is most repetitive, right? Like maybe your key challenge is just like, oh, okay, like for my month end, I have like a million line and my Excel keep crashing. Then you basically ask yourself question, is this something like AI can help like automate and do this much better? Or if you look at like the job of FP&A, you ask the question like today, like what percentage of that is like repetitive? So maybe like at some point in my like old Stripe job, like 80% of that is just like very like a repetitive in some way. Then you start to like ask the question like, okay, is this something like we could build like internally, right? So if you want to do like something on the service level, like finance team, you could probably just use it yourself. Or if you happen to have like a data science partner, like some engineering partner, could they actually build like a small custom, like either data pipeline or some like a small lightweight application for the finance team? Or you could also look like externally, like today, are there sort of like AI startup that really focus on this use case, so I can take something like off the shelf. So really it's like just going back to like each of like the individual jobs, right? And look at like where is like the biggest bottleneck, what is like the part that's like taking the longest of time. And once you like free up people from like spending 75% doing like the repetitive task, then suddenly we have like all the creativity and mind space to actually think about like, oh, like how to help the company grow, like what are potential opportunities to like 2x or like 10x the valuation of my company.
Paul, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think going forward, it's going to be quite interesting. I think there's It's gonna be like an arms race in like, for example, fraud and anti-fraud. Now there's like very good technology to do kind of like deep fake, Zoom video, and all this sort of stuff that will try to like basically defraud your company via wires, payments, ACH bill payments in various different ways. And so if you're a CFO, you're going to want to watch out on that front. But then there's also going to be a lot of technology that will help detect fraudulent transactions, detect like invoice fraud, payment fraud, vendor fraud. And so I suspect like there will be a bit of an arms race, and people will need to kind of make sure that they're sufficiently protected against that in their finance orgs, and they have the right controls and processes that, normally maybe you would have waited till you're public or a large enterprise to put in, but there will be more of a need for that sooner with the way AI technology is progressing. And then I think we spoke pretty extensively about the core workflow, but I think there's going to be a lot of workflow kind of innovation and efficiency that comes online over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What are your senses, and we touched upon this a little bit already, but where are we on the top technology adoption curve today for AI, right? Are we still in the early phases of innovation, early adoption phases? We're getting close to that crossing the chasm, as they say it. And how does this impact businesses of different segments, be it consumers, SMB, mid-market, or enterprise? How do you think about that today based on the experiences that you've had?
I would say we're still super early, probably like the first inning. So literally, like we are seeing like those like application companies just like started to form literally like maybe within the past year, and I think we are going to see like a lot more companies forming in the next few years. So for example, I know there are like really senior like CFO type leaders just like, okay, like I hate the ERP, the experience is like so bad, and now with LLM, there's basically potential to like reimagine the thing from like the ground up, not start back in like 1980s. So I know people who like literally just like quit their job, but bring like 20, 30 years of experience now experimenting with LLM to potentially build something, but they're literally still in the idea formation stage. So I would say we're like still really, really early. So that's why like right now it's kind of like exciting, especially if you like to like tinker around things. So really it's like a good time if like you are kind of like innovative, you want to like think about potential efficiency. Let's say like if your org doesn't have like additional headcount for finance team, like all the headcount goes to like product end or like salespeople, you're like, I wanted to do more, or like the CEO wants the finance org to do more, but like I don't have enough headcount, then I think it's just like a really good time to see like if there are like things you could build like internally, like basically either directly ChatGPT or like using a GPT API call. It's like relatively straightforward, or potentially like check out some of those like AI startups like out there. But all of the startups like right now is all like pretty early overall. So I think basically for our organization, I would say like right now I'm seeing like adoption of like AI technology across stages. It's pretty different from like the last like cloud wave. I feel like for the last cloud wave, it's like really you see like sort of like the SMB startup and growth stage company is like really heavy like early adopters of like any new SaaS tools, because basically it's like, okay, we are growing the fastest and we are like the most resource constrained, so we really need tools to like help us like improve productivity. I think like the interesting thing for AI is like right now I'm actually seeing like use case like adoption across the board, from like really small like startups to like really large like enterprises. Like think about like a Fortune 20 or Fortune 50, just because like the potential for like efficiency saving for a lot of those like white collar like financial like professional service job is like so profound. So I don't think like there should be like any reason to like say no to AI because of the size of your company, or like, oh, like my company tend to be like late adopter of technology. That doesn't apply here. I'm like seeing like really like a conservative like Fortune 500 company now really eager to like adopt like AI technology as well. But right now it's still like super early, so it does take a lot of experimentation. So I would say like relatively stay like open-minded, just given how early we are on the technology curve. So it's not like a mature ERP solution, you take it off the shelf, then you suddenly get a 10x increase. It's more like you either need to like build something like internally, or like you're open to try an external tool, but still you need to sort of have that human in the loop to provide feedback in order to like realize the full potential of an AI tool.
Yeah, Paul, and what are your thoughts on this? And maybe just to tack on the question from audience yesterday that we have, which says AI learns in exponential ways, different from people that need more time to learn and adapt. Very true. Do you think the increasing use of AI will create a wave of unemployment for finance teams in the near future? Yeah, how do you think about investment into AI technology versus people? Like, how much of a budget do you set aside in a relatively new technology?
I think for most companies, I mean, I think if you're like a Fortune 100 enterprise, you may be in a different space, but you're probably not on this webinar. But I think for most companies that are on this webinar, like you're probably best off utilizing AI technology versus building your own. It's very capital intensive to build your own models or build your own tooling around it. And so I imagine that like what folks should do is they should start experimenting with some of the existing third-party models and tooling and see if it could drive efficiencies in kind of work that they do. I do think that there is some classic like implementation costs to any new technology, and there's a long like standing reason why like you might not adapt like an Oracle or SAP ERP until you're a fairly large enterprise, because the cost of adopting that technology is like fairly expensive, even though it adds automation to your workflow. And so in some ways there's technologies that are lower implementation costs and others that are much higher if you're changing the entire workflow of how you do all of your processing of accounting transactions. That's probably a pretty large lift. And so, yeah, I think you kind of want to pick and choose areas where you feel like you get efficiency for like relatively low implementation costs, and then just experiment to see if there's a good vendor that could meet your needs. And so pretty classic kind of like purchasing journey on that front. And then like people, I think it's kind of interesting that AI models out today are good at basically ingesting data and retrieving it for you. They're good information retrieval tools. I mean, Google has also been a great information tool for a very long time. They run on a different sort of technology where it's more PageRank than it is inference, but similar end result. If you like search a question on Google, it's pretty good at trying to figure out what the question should relate to based on past experience with other people searching the same question. And I think so they're great at that. I think they're less good at like with very limited data and very limited context, like trying to figure out what to do. The models that are used by a lot of folks today have billions and billions of parameters. They're very, very large models, hence the name LLM. At most of your companies, you probably won't have the data sets that could really work for that sort of approach.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Maybe we'll touch upon tools and technology a little bit, and at this point, can you perhaps share with the audience some of like the top 5 tools and technology that you like the most based on some of the use cases that we've discussed? The ones that you're most excited by. Maybe Sarah, a minute to you first.
So I think just to level set, as I mentioned, I think like the external like tools is still like very early stage. So take this with like a grain of salt. Like right now, it's not like okay, like GPT is like okay, like ChatGPT like very mature. Like I would say like a lot of like the specific like application is still really early on. So for example, if you do struggle with like contract management, those type of thing. So there's like a company. So basically, full disclaimer, I invested in the company. It's called yellowpad.ai. So essentially like they help like really with like the contract management, whether it's like sales contract, vendor contract, or partnership contract. So it really helped like improve like the efficiency there. Another bucket I would recommend people to look into is like models. If you do need to like build and update your models like quite frequently, right now there are like a few different like AI players that really like help improve like the model side. But in general, like I kind of feel like for finance users, like we don't like update the model that much. So probably is like less of like a pain point. The third bucket I would say is basically around like ERP, and then specifically for like company that have like manufacturing. I know like most people on this call is probably like from like a tech company, but to the extent like if your company like does do like some manufacturing element, then you know like for manufacturing all the like COGS, essentially it's like you have like each like individual purchase order, like hundreds and thousands of them. So basically that's where like LLM could really do the job like a lot more efficiently. Before you would just literally have like so many accountants going through like hundreds, thousands of like purchase order to just calculate like the COGS, right? But now like basically that's something like I'm seeing like specific like industry vertical LLM that could sort of like automate that part of the job. So potentially it could save you like 50% of the time like closing the book. And then the fourth bucket where I'm seeing like application is basically when you need to do like a certain type of like slide deck and repeat that over and over. So for example, like back in Stripe, we have like a weekly business metrics review. So it's like the same format, and then you need to like refresh the data like every week for the executive team. And there are also like a lot of like AI startup that focus on sort of like just giving you like the precise output. So if to the extent like you do have like those like business needs where like your CEO want like the same slide deck like refresh like every week, and it takes like 10 plus hours to like automate, there are like also AI tools that help with that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Paul, what are some hot and exciting startups for you?
I'll kind of go through a couple of categories that are really exciting. I think one is, I think I previously mentioned kind of like the AI like fraud detection category. I think is somewhat interesting. I think there are a lot of data patterns that have been historically used for fraud, and so I think this will just enable people to enhance it out even more. Second category that I think is really interesting is some of the AI agents. I think it's really early, but to the extent that like some of the computer science agents or some of the finance agents make it out of the early stages, I think that will be super useful to a lot of companies. Third category I want to probably touch on is probably things that are being like really useful for engineering. So kind of like code completion, Copilot, that sort of stuff, where it is driving a lot of efficiencies in how people do their workflow by not like today, like overtaking the software engineer, but helping augment what they do in a faster way.
Okay, excellent. And I know we have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to end with two topics. One is a question from our audience, Christine Anderson, who asks, how can AI assist CFOs in budget line items such as HR and healthcare costs, but not insurance, but not in addition? Maybe just to clarify based on what I think the question is asking, which is like variance analysis in budget versus forecast, perhaps on HR and healthcare costs. Is that what you intended, Christine? Okay, we can also move on. Now that you're both on the investment side, we haven't touched upon the investment use cases. How do you think about AI and automation when it comes to the entire investment deal and life cycle from A to Z?
I think there's a couple places that I've seen firms kind of use AI so far. I think some of the memo authoring, taking like a first draft of the investment memo, where maybe you have like a dozen or so bullet points and you have links to their profiles, and there's like a standard format that you have. And so instead of someone like going to LinkedIn and copying and pasting their background, etc. Like I've seen folks like leverage large language models to help build out the first draft of their memos. I think the technology is still to the state where like you still want it to be more of like a first draft than the final draft that you're using, but over time like that also may change. I've also seen some folks use AI technology to help them with sourcing in various ways as they like look through different data factors. I think I've seen this more on the consumer side. Yeah.
And I would add there's also a use case specifically for like the investment process. So basically before, like I was a public market investor, you're like, okay, like I look at a company and I need to go through like all the past like earnings transcript and I want to check the competitors. So it's just like a lot of like documents you need to like read manually. So now basically there are like easy tools where literally you create like a table. Here are like the columns I care about. And then it basically just digests all 50 like earnings call transcript, like 10K for this company competitors, like all at once. So it just like allow like the initial like data synthesization like a lot faster. So that's sort of like a game changer. There are like also like other AI tool that's sort of like funny, like for hedge funds to like generate new ideas, potentially for like alpha creation. There are also tools that sort of like help like investment banks to sort of like have their edge, so they can show like they really understand the customer a lot better. So like even like helping the investment bank like win like a few million contracts. So it's just like interesting to see. Like before we would think like, oh, AI tool is just like for efficiency saving, but I think potentially if AI could actually like generate alpha for the investment industry or for like CFO teams, I think that's where the most exciting stuff gonna happen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we're out of time. Actually, we're running slightly over, but thank you so much for your insights. What I took away from this session is that, we're still very much in the early adoption phases of AI technology across all customer segments, from consumer through to mid-market and enterprise. There's definitely a number of different business use cases and applications within the finance industry, specifically to the day-to-day work, but also enabling people to be much more strategic and forward-thinking and focusing on ultimately the insights and the actions that we take away from the insights, rather than historically where it's been very much focused on processing analysis. But I think time will tell. It is a very capital-intensive industry, as you alluded to, Sarah. So the verdict is still out there in terms of what the direct impact will be from a P&L perspective and from a return on investment perspective in the medium long term. But definitely lots of promising opportunities and also risks to manage as we navigate the coming years and beyond. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate everyone listening in.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And to the extent if you want to like keep the conversation, you can find me on LinkedIn. I know like today I wasn't able to give like a lot of specific examples just because we're like so early stage. But if you want to like keep the dialogue, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat more offline too.
Thank you all.
Take care.